Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business program presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Listen weekday mornings to Ken and Matt on the WGAN Morning News. Eggs and Issues is supported by presenting sponsors Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare in cooperation with Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, First Light Fiber, and WEX. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber of Commerce President Jack Lufkin.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody, on what is to be our final Eggs and Issues of this season. We couldn't be more pleased to have the governor with us today, and we're going to get to him in just a minute. I am going to break from protocol a little bit, and I want to invite up our Regional Chamber Board President, Jim Irwin, to talk to you about an item that's coming up before the voters in November. So, Jim?
So good morning, folks. I want to speak briefly to an issue that the Chamber thinks represents a serious threat to Maine's economic and fiscal future, and that is this November ballot question, LD 1864. It's called an Act to Establish Universal Home Care for Seniors and Persons with Disabilities. So Maine's referendum process has given birth to yet another pernicious piece of legislation masquerading as social justice. On the November ballot, voters are going to be asked to approve this bill. So what is this bill going to do for the state? Well, it's going to make us the highest tax state in the U.S. It's unconstitutional in at least three ways. It would make family member caregivers state employees for collective bargaining purposes. It's a money grab and a power grab by the SEIU and other unions, and it's largely being funded, big surprise here, by out-of-state money. So here's what LD 1864 would pay for, and in our view, this is terrible public policy. I'm not going to read this thing, but I just want you to skim it quickly and then think about what that means. Look at the services that would be paid for by taxpayer money under this bill. So what this means is that anyone over age 65, and there's no means test here, so anyone could hire their own family members to be paid for by the state to do tasks which family members already do for each other every single day. George Soros, the billionaire financier who treats Maine as his personal social engineering laboratory, could move here and have the state pay his family members to take care of him. The bill also gives a collection of special interest groups, caregivers, agencies, beneficiaries, and their family members exclusive control over the election of the board members who would make the rules and spend the tax dollars to run the program. That's Maine's taxpayer money being allocated and spent with no legislative oversight and no accountability. The bill creates strong incentives for Maine businesses to leave, for other businesses to stay away, and for our dwindling number of well-off retirees to find another state of residence. Now let me get into a little bit more of the specifics as to why that is. So on the tax side, 1864 imposes an additional 3.8% on adjusted gross income above the Social Security cap. If your income is a salary, then for you it's a payroll tax, paid half by you and half by your employer. But if you have other income, such as from owning a business, from rental property, investments, or retirement plan, you pay all of it, the full 3.8%. So it directly impacts nearly every business and business owner in the state, specifically Subchapter S corporations and LLCs, which many Maine businesses are. So, and this is on every dollar of gross, not taxable income, above $128,400 will be subject to this tax. And if you or your spouse and your spouse file jointly and have adjusted gross income above this level, you will also be subject to this tax. So this tax would create a marginal rate of 10.95% on adjusted gross income above $128,000, making Maine the highest tax state in the entire country on income below $1 million, which in Maine is pretty much everybody. This is also the largest tax increase in Maine's history, according to the state chamber. This bill also facilitates the collection of a union service fee for the MSEA. More about that in a minute. So this bill is an example of an extremely rare phenomenon, an unconstitutionality trifecta. As my Pierce Atwood colleague and former Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Court, Dan Wathen, has recently stated publicly, the bill is unconstitutional in at least the following ways. First of all, it violates the Maine Constitution by delegating to private entities the authority to elect persons to discharge a governmental function. So 1864 creates something called the Universal Home Care Trust Fund Board. And after the initial appointments of the board members by political leaders, all future board members would be elected exclusively by the very interest groups that benefit from the bill: personal care agencies, individual providers, direct care service providers, and care recipients, or their family members. So only the people who get the money or the care would populate the board that governs the program. This scheme violates the Maine Constitution because the state cannot delegate fundamental governmental functions to private parties. Secondly, it violates the Maine Constitution by delegating a significant governmental function and does so without providing sufficient standards to guide the governing board in designing and administering the program. Now, this board will undoubtedly have to make choices about who gets services and at what level, because there's not going to be enough money to pay for all the benefits for which there will be demand. And there are no standards for how those decisions get made. And third, it violates the U.S. Constitution and federal labor law by authorizing a dues checkoff provision that is preempted by federal law for private sector unions, and by collecting service fees from individual home care providers that are employed directly by families or individuals for public sector unions that they don't even choose to join. We're missing a slide. I don't know what happened here. So this is a union money grab. And that should be clear as you get into the details of how this scheme works. It's intended to create a whole new and large and growing class of union members. And it automatically funnels their dues and fees back to the SEIU and other unions. So to create the funnel, the bill makes every directly employed home care worker a state employee for collective bargaining purposes, even though there is no employer-employee relationship. So Johnny and Susie, helping to look after Grandma, are now going to be state employees. A similar scheme was recently found to violate the First Amendment as mandating speech, and another similar case will be decided by the Supreme Court any day. And remember, that board, chosen by the beneficiaries of the home care program, that's who the unions will be negotiating with over pay and benefits. This is essentially negotiating with themselves. At arm's length, this is not. So quickly, let's look at where the money's coming from. What you see on this slide comes from something called the Caring Majority, and what I would say is the mendaciously named Mainers for Home Care donor websites as of June 8th. And I want to thank Tony Payne for digging this up for me. As you'll see, the contributions in support of LD 1864, out of state money, 81%, almost all of which is from, gee, what a surprise, the SEIU and the Soros family. In-state, 19%, all of it from the Maine People's Alliance. So the Chamber's position on this bill should be obvious by now. But the Chamber recognizes the challenge in Maine of caring for our aging population and those with special needs. Long-term care insurance is generally unaffordable, and many families struggle to support the needs of aging parents. It's an issue that needs our attention. But does anyone think that this scheme could possibly work? Do we think that every business and taxpayer is just going to pay up? They're not going to change their behavior because they got hit with this tax? That's not what experience teaches us. That having only the people who benefit from the program permitted to decide who runs it, does that provide any kind of an adequate check? This creates an enormous entitlement with an economically damaging and highly speculative revenue source to pay for it. So the Universal Home Care Act is absolutely not the answer to how we care for our elderly and disabled, and the PRCC, Portland Regional Chamber, adamantly opposes this referendum. So here's what you can do, and here's what we're asking everyone here to do. Read the information you have on your tables. Talk to your friends, talk to your coworkers, your neighbors and family members. Educate yourself and them as to how this proposal would harm Maine's economy, its reputation, small businesses and families, and contribute to help fight this ill-conceived ballot question. Thank you all for listening. Please do bring your part to bring the state back from the brink. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Just want to make clear that the presentation that Jim referred to will be made available to all of our members here today. So I think that's going to go on the Chamber's website. So moving on, I am Jack Lufkin, and I am an employee of Key Bank here in Maine. And I do want to take a minute to pause. A short time ago, about a week and a half ago, Portland lost a true business and community leader, Sterling Kozlowski. Sterling served as market president for Key Bank in Maine since 2010. From the moment he arrived, his leadership and community service was felt. A champion for such causes as Focus Maine, the Maine Community College System, and the Mitchell Institute, among others, his presence will be missed. A memorial service for Sterling is being held in New York with his family later this month, but there will be one here at the end of July in Maine. So we wish Sterling Godspeed. And let me move on from there. So we will be welcoming the governor here in just a moment, but a couple of last-minute announcements. First thing I want to talk about is Kegs and Issues. That is happening at Aura, and it will feature CEO Ben Shaw. That is happening tomorrow. And it's also worth mentioning that the Kegs and Issues portion, the Kegs portion, the Chamber along with Bangor Savings Bank and a trio of member breweries are releasing a limited edition beer called Bowie 207. And this specialty brew will be available this week only. $1 from each sale goes to the Good Shepherd Food Bank, so you can drink for a good cause. At your tables, there is a card with a promo code good for 33% off your Kegs and Issues ticket. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do so. We're also hosting a Women of the Chamber event before the summer break. On Tuesday, June 26th, we'll be gathering in the garden of the Maine Historical Society for cocktails and connections. You can register for this event on the Chamber's website, and your ticket includes an entrance to the museum to see their current exhibits. The last event I would like to mention is the second annual Ignition Awards brought to you by Propel, our young Chamber professionals group in the Chamber. This event is a celebration of Propel and serves to recognize both small and large local businesses for all of their successes they've achieved over the past year and for the positive impact they've created within their community. The event is next Thursday, June 28th at Tika. Tickets are still available at propelportland.com. I would like to give you just a brief update on some of our advocacy efforts before we move on into the presentation. Last week, we became aware that the Portland City Council intended to vote upon a change to a city ordinance that would have nearly doubled the mandate for developers to larger-scale housing projects to build designated affordable units. While well-intended, as we all recognize the need for increased housing in Portland across all income spectrums, this ordinance, if passed, we feared would have had a chilling effect on housing development, given the rising costs of development in the city. We reached out to our network of members and interested parties to alert them of the possible change, and they made their voices heard. I want to thank them for reaching out to the councilors. Many of them testified at the hearing on Monday night, and I ultimately want to thank the Portland City Council for rejecting the proposal in a very thoughtful manner, and we are all looking forward to working together to increase housing opportunities in Portland. And we do have two members of the Portland City Council here, Mayor Strimling and Councilor Dusson. I don't know if there are others in attendance, but thank you for your service. So. Now, moving on, I'd like to recognize the newest members of the Chamber. The following organizations have joined the Chamber in the last month. Welcome to the Chamber. Let's give them a round of applause. Now, this event, and as I mentioned, this is the last one of this season, would not be possible without the generous donations of our sponsors. We have many folks who have signed up for next year, and we may still have Chamber sponsorship available for next year, so if you're interested in that, please see Quincy. But we can't thank enough these sponsors for Eggs and Issues. Our presenting sponsors are Bank of America, Martins Point Healthcare, Harvard Pilgrim, and our cooperating sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, WEX, and First Light. Our reception sponsors are Verrill Dana, Clark Insurance, and KeyBank, and our parking sponsor, CV Mahar Engineers. Headlight Audiovisual does a fantastic job providing us with our overall production support. The Forecaster is our print sponsor. Maine Biz is our e-media partner. And WGAN is our radio sponsor. WMTW-TV is our broadcast sponsor. We'd also like to thank our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare, the University of Southern Maine, and Southern Maine Community College. AAA of Northern New England and Springborn Staffing provide support for our Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs program, which allows area high school and college students to attend Eggs and Issues. Unfortunately, they're either taking finals or they're off for their summer break, so I don't think we have any students here today, but I want to thank AAA and Springborn for their leadership. That's an important part of Eggs and Issues. The Portland Public Library is our FMI for More Information sponsor, and they will provide additional information regarding today's topic after the event. Baker Newman & Noyes is our sponsor for our Community Corners program. This month's Community Corner is the Maine Cancer Foundation. The Maine Cancer Foundation is dedicated to reducing cancer incidence and mortalities in Maine. 100% of their money is invested back into Maine communities to benefit us, our families, and our neighbors. The story of cancer in Maine is sobering. Our cancer rates are higher than the national average, and it is the leading cause of death in our state. 1 in 4 Mainers will face a cancer diagnosis in their lifetime, and about 3,000 people will die from cancer this year. Maine Cancer Foundation leads a statewide endeavor to foster and grow the most promising and effective cancer-fighting efforts available through a combination of grant-based financial support and coalition building. You can learn more about this important organization at mainecancer.org. We do have some staff in attendance, and I would like to recognize them. We have Ray Ruby, Community Outreach Manager, Kelly Martin, Director of Operation and Finance, and Heather Drake, Program Manager, Collective Impact. If you would stand and be recognized. Now, without further ado, we do want to get on to today's presentation. I will remind everybody that there will be a question and answer session at the conclusion of the governor's remarks. We have 2 microphones set up in the room, and we would like you to please use those microphones so everybody can hear the question. Please state your name and if you have an affiliation, and then state your question. So today's speaker needs no introduction. Governor LePage is finishing his 2nd term as Maine governor, and we are honored to have him joining with us this morning. Without further ado, Governor Paul LePage.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I would just like to start by saying thank you, and it's likely my last time approaching visiting you at Eggs and Issues. I just wish I'd have been invited to Kegs and Issues. That's more my style. You know, it's an honor to be here, and today I'm going to be a little bit more lighthearted than in the past. I'm going to tell you what's going on that's good, what's going on that's bad, and I'd like to start off by what Jim Irving was just speaking about. This is a very serious issue. This is worse than the 3% that we had a couple years ago. And he's absolutely correct when he says this is George Soros's backyard. And what we need to do as a state is just stop this madness. And you can easily stop it by requiring the legislature to address the referendum process in the state of Maine. It is really bad. It's one of the easiest ways. You can pass a referendum in Maine by going down to the Portland Mall, the Main Mall, on a weekend, get enough signatures to put something on the ballot. It disenfranchises about 3/4 of the state. It is just not fair, it's not adequate, it's not doing its job, and the Maine People's Alliance has a stranglehold on our process. I have asked the legislature on numerous occasions let's do something different. Let's increase the number from 10% to 15%, and rather than just say statewide, why don't we do it by Senate district? Or why don't we just increase it from 50% to 2/3% to make sure that the Maine people truly want it? But we really, truly need to fix this, because you're not only going to be the highest tax state, but I'll tell you, this referendum that they're talking about, we have right now a state that is in the best financial shape it's been in 50 years. We are in better shape than we've been in 50 years. We have money in the bank, we've paid our bills, we have adequate funding to do home care. We do have the money. The legislature chooses not to prioritize our elderly. And I'll go on a little bit more about what's happening to our elderly. But we have right now, our veterans, 1.7% unemployment rate for our veterans, 2.8% statewide. In southern Maine, it's even less. If you didn't have towns like Millinocket that have lost so much work, our unemployment would be close to zero, which creates a major problem. We don't have a labor force. So I asked the legislature, very simple, I think, innocuous requests, wouldn't hurt anybody, but help a lot of Mainers. Why don't we, between the end of school year and the start of the next school year in the summer months, waive the permits requirement for 14, 15-year-olds and allow them to go into the tourist industry to work? How hard? There's 30,000 kids that could help in the tourist industry. 30,000 kids. I'd be all over it in a heartbeat. I started working at 10. At 14, man, I was a veteran. And the bigger problem is our kids don't start work till 16, and they don't have the work skills necessary to fill an entry-level job. And I'm not talking about working. I'm talking about showing up on time, being respectful to your bosses. I mean, at Martin's, at times, we'd hire a 16-year-old who'd come in. They had never had an order given to them in their entire lives. And I remember asking a young lady one time, when there's nobody at the cash register, would you help stock the shelves around the cash register to keep it neat? That's not my job. These are little things you teach our youth as they enter the workforce. I just think it's common sense, it's simple, but the speaker has said, no way. No child labor, that's slavery. It's insane. Do you know that in the state of Maine, you can bus a table in a restaurant at 14 years old unless there was liquor served on that table? You can't pick up an empty glass of beer, so you couldn't have kids cleaning tables at Kegs and Issues. It's silly stuff. These silly, silly laws. You know, we've got our hospitals were paid off. We've got a liquor business that this year is going to be historical. We're going to set a record for most revenues from our liquor business. Why did that happen? We did two simple things. We allow the retailers to make a little bit more profit, and we lowered the price of liquor, trying to approach the prices in New Hampshire. And guess what happened? New Hampshire is now advertising in Maine, trying to get Mainers to go back down to New Hampshire to buy liquor. This is not a draconian process. Every business person in this audience knows there's only two ways to make money. You lower costs or you increase price. We lowered costs. We got more efficient. This year we're going to put in excess of $50 million in revenues from the liquor business. I think it's 52 or 53 million at the end of this month. Now, prior to my arriving, for the previous 10 years, it was $10 million a year we were making as a commission for leasing out our liquor business. And I think over that time, we got bonuses of roughly 20 million. So over 10 years, we made 120, 125 million. Now we're making 100 million in 2 years. So the state is really moved in the right direction. I will be the first one to admit I'm like a bull in a china closet, no question. I use street language when I probably should be a little bit more polished. However, I did it on behalf of 1.2 million people, and the 1.2 million people are better off. So these referendums is one major challenge that we face going forward. You gotta get rid of it. You gotta fix it. Just fix it. Another challenge that we have going forward is the minimum wage. The minimum wage is not a problem. Here in Cumberland County, the entry-level wage is over $11. So minimum wage doesn't even play a factor. In northern Maine, the entry level is roughly about $10.50, a little $10.60. So it doesn't even play a factor there. The problem with minimum wage is the compression on wages. If you're making $10 and you go to 11, the person making 11 wants to go to 13, the person making 12 wants to go to 14, and that's where the problem is. And let me tell you what's happening. The economy is heating right now, is overheating. By the end of this year, we're going to be tipping probably into a recession. And what the deciding factor is, the latest tariff that was put on by the president. And I support this president and this administration, but I do not support tariffs. I never have. I've studied tariffs all the way back to Grover Cleveland when they were first introduced. They have never worked successfully in this nation, because we're too big a user of world commodities. And they can't work. So what's happening, we're being inundated with concrete right now. We have softwood tariffs. The softwood tariffs really are causing us some problems. But the latest one is steel, Section 232. What that is doing, most of the steel that comes into Maine comes out of Canada. There's a tariff on the Canadian steel. There are companies in Maine right now that have contracts, but you add 25% tariff onto it, they're all losing money. That's the killer. And then add the compression of wages onto it, and we are heading into red ink. It looks like it's probably going to be $50 million of red ink by the end of this year. Now, add a little complexity to that is all the social service programs. And let me tell you, home care services, there's plenty of money to increase. The problem is, and what this referendum is going to do, it works with the minimum wage, it just puts that much more stress. So right now, if you don't give the home care workers an increase, or nursing homes, right? And the nursing homes do need an increase right now. There are 8 of them ready to go into receivership. 4 of them will go into receivership. It's just, you gotta pay people. If you demand a minimum wage, you gotta pay it. I've been after the legislature to do one simple thing. Increase the reimbursement rates to home care and to nursing homes. Not a problem. We need to do that. And there's plenty of money to do it. But I'm asking them not to repeal the minimum wage. I don't have a problem with the minimum wage, because minimum wage should be an entry-level wage, not a living wage. I've always felt that. I think it should be there. I don't have a problem if you want to have it. I think a better solution to a minimum wage is better work skills, education, in my case, helped me get away from minimum wage. Well, actually, I became governor, so it's still minimum wage. But the point I'm trying to make here is right now, we're in an inflationary factor about 3%. A dollar increase on $10, let's say it's 10% increase. This economy isn't vibrant enough to absorb a 10% increase on wages in a 3% inflation factor. Who's getting hurt the most? Nonprofits that depend on state government for their revenues. Small businesses from 1 to 10 people are really starting to show. You're seeing people getting laid off now. Had a gentleman from Dover Foxcroft, owns a supermarket, said, my wife and I are semi-retired. This year, with the second dollar of the minimum wage, we've realized that in order to make a profit, we have to lay off one full-time, a part-time, and my wife and I have to go back to work full-time in order to be able to make it. I'm getting this every day now. We're getting emails and letters and phone calls. This is routine, 1 to 10. And then the ones that this referendum is attempting, 1864 is attempting to help, is our elderly. They're on fixed income. And they're being asked to absorb $4 increase in 4 years on a fixed income, when if they're lucky to get a 3% COLA. And incidentally, they're not getting a 3% COLA from the federal government. They only get 3% COLA if they work in Maine, and I'm issuing a 3% COLA. When I became governor, we had furlough days. We had 8 years without any increase to state employees. We had 14,000 employees. What do? I got rid of furlough days immediately, and I went down and took the most marginal employees and we laid them off, and we gave more money to those that are high performers. We've given COLAs. Yes, we froze it the first 2 years because of the deficiencies in our retirement system. But now the retirement system is one of the best in the country. It's solid. It's moving forward. We have cash flow of $1 billion. I overcame a structural gap of $1.3 billion. I've got it down to $165 million. We've done the job financially. And as a businessman, I make no apologies for doing the job I said I was going to do. You may not like the way I did it. My bedside manner may not be good, but we got there. We're healthy. And it's time for me to move on and let somebody else just carry forward. And I'm all in. But as I leave, I think there are things that we have to remember. Minimum wage is a major challenge. Lack of work is a major challenge. I asked the legislature, listen, give me student debt. Let's go get a bond. We're borrowing money at about 1.5%. Let's go get a $50 million bond. We'll give all the kids in Maine that stay in Maine, go to Maine schools, we'll give them interest-free loans. Then we go to the employers once they get out and say, you hire them and you pay their student debt off as an employment package. We'll refund dollar for dollar the amount you paid against student loans. We'll refund that in your tax bill. Now, what's that do? You get young people, get a good education, they get it free eventually. If the employer gets a new employee, they train them to their work model, their business model. And the best thing of all is the young people, instead of paying in historical debt, they're paying, their income is going towards their net worth, homes, cars, investments in their families. I can't get the legislature to budge. In 2016 and 15, we sold a bond, a $45 million bond for R&D. Money's been allocated. I will be the first one to say, I think the allocation process was flawed. I think they could have done a better job. We're not perfect, but it was the first time at it. But that $45 million generated $400 million of investment. I've asked for another $50 million. We could get up to $1 billion. We have 9 companies moving into Maine this year. Every single one of them The wages they're going to pay, we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about high-end engineering, we're not talking about entry-level call centers, we're talking about real jobs. The family living wages, we're talking $18 to $30. Some are going to pay $100 and be in the six figures in the engineering side. So we are getting there. But these referendums, back when we had the 3%, passed in November, and I think it was March when they repealed it. In that short period of time, we lost just under 500 professionals. Doctors, dentists, professors, engineers just said, I'm out of here. That's real income. But we gave it up. We need to say enough is enough. We can't have George Soros running our lives. We can't have the Maine People's Alliance, who are funded by George, setting up these referendums that really hurt each and every one of us. We are a state that was developed on small business. And they're trying to eat them up. Everybody at Maine People's Alliance seems to think that if you have a business, you are wealthy. For those of you who have a business and you're wealthy, you're my heroes. For those of you that struggle every day to make a living, to feed your family, and to put your kids through school, and you're not have a net worth of 7 digits, my heart goes out to you because you should, because we make it more difficult. And so this is a real issue. And I think Jim, I commend him. He was spot on what he said. This should go down in flames. It's so bad. So let me tell you a few other things beyond the minimum wage, beyond kids working, that I think our legislature is failing. The legislature in the state of Maine, particularly in an election year, and I'm not talking, you notice I use the word legislature, not Democrats, or not progressives. I say legislature, because last week I had a legislature come in and told me that she was going to vote for all of the increases in reimbursements and didn't care about minimum wage, didn't care about the elderly. And her comment to me was, if I'm not here in January, I can't fix it. Well, I want to tell you folks, if you go to Augusta because you want to get reelected, you should say no to them. I went to Augusta. I was very controversial the first 4 years. The newspapers and I have this, not a love-hate relationship, an absolute hate relationship. And I wear that with a badge of honor, because they're so bad you can't even trust the obituaries. They're unfair, they're unbalanced, and if you have an R next to your name, forget it. It's just not right. So, the elderly. I put a bill in, really innocuous bill. All I'm saying is, if an elderly lives on fixed income over 65 years old and they own their home outright, and they go through a catastrophe, like a death in the family, cancer, which we heard is a big problem, and they can't pay their taxes because they're on fixed income. In the state of Maine, a community can take the house and all of the equity, and that's it. They throw the people out on the street. Now, since January, well, I'm sorry, not since January, because Mrs. Sukford just passed away this week. 2 years ago, Richard and his wife were out of Albion, were kicked out of their home. Home was worth about $75,000. They owed $6,000 in taxes, no mortgage. They could have easily gone into a reverse mortgage. They could have, the town could have put a lien on the house, let them live there the rest of their life. When they died, they had sold the house. They could have got their taxes plus the interest, but no. House was valued between $75,000 and $80,000. He couldn't pay his taxes. They threw him out. The abutter bought the land for the land and property for $6,500. I'm telling you, anybody in this room believes that's fair, I'm sorry, we're in a different world. I think that's wrong. A bank can't do that. A bank can foreclose, they get all their expenses out, and any proceeds got to go back to the former owner. That's the right way to do it. And towns will have short sales. Like in the case in Albion, the short sale was the chief selectman sold it to his best friend, who happened to be the abutter. This week, Caribou, Maine, Ruby Pelletier, 85 years old. Her husband's in hospice at the VA, and that's why she's in trouble. He's been in the VA now for a little over a year. His pension goes to pay for his stay at the veterans home. So she lives on a very small. She offered to pay $50 a week, $50 a month towards her taxes. Town said no. They were going to kick her out on July 15th. I was in the process of paying the taxes, and some good Samaritan walked in Monday, paid it off. Boom, done. The problem is, lien's off. In this year's taxes, they'll put another lien on. And if she lives beyond 18 months, she's going to be facing the same exact thing. All they have to do is put a lien on it, let the taxes accrue, the interest accrue. When she passes on, you get your money back, town's kept whole. Why do we have to throw people out? Bath, Maine, just this week, a veteran who's been ill. He's been incapacitated in Connecticut, so he's not getting the notices. He didn't respond. They came in, closed, took the house, took his furniture, put it in storage, and he's now fighting to get all his personal belongings, took his guns. It's just a horrible story. This is happening all the time. All I ask the legislature is pass a bill to say treat people that have no mortgages on their home, treat them the way you would treat somebody that has a mortgage. I tell elderly when I talk to them, go to your banker, get a very small mortgage, and you'll make a friend. You'll have a free advisor. Right? Isn't that what happens? They don't want to hurt people. And so I asked him, just pass the bill. Sarah Gideon, and I'm going to say now, this is Sarah Gideon. She tabled the bill and killed it. She tabled the minimum wage bill and killed it. There's no reason for doing that. The largest single population in Maine is our elderly. They've lived here. This Ruby Pelletier, let me give you a history. Got married at 18 years old. She and her husband bought the house. He's at 86, she's 84. He's in hospice. Her brother's in Bangor, very ill. She's trying to make it on her little benefit. They paid their mortgage off in 1979. Hasn't had a mortgage. Everything's been hunky-dory until the husband gets sick. This is what happens. This is what happens. It's not people that have not paid their taxes. It's not good citizens. It's people that run into medical catastrophes or death. And so I really urge all of you to call your legislature and your senators, because they're in special session, and say, take that bill off the table and pass it. This is silliness. But the reason the Democrats won't, and the reason the speakers killed it or tabled it, is because of the Maine Municipal Association. They don't want to give that power up. And then I mentioned that, the Maine Municipal Association, and the CEO's name in my radio message, and he went ballistic. Well, he doesn't want people to know what he's doing? That's just not right, folks. We are Mainers. We take care of our own. And we don't need these nonprofit special interests come in and try to tell us how to live our lives. So I leave that with you. I think you should be calling your legislators. That elderly foreclosure, to me, is probably, if that could be passed, would be better and more important to me than having paid the $750 million to the hospitals. It only happens 4 or 5 times a year. But people who've lived their lives correctly, paid all their bills, they run into financial trouble because of illness or death, and we throw them on the street. I just think that's wrong. That's not Maine. And if it is Maine, it's time that we find another state. The next thing I'm going to talk to you about just for a few minutes, is property taxes. Everybody keeps saying property taxes are going up because of schools. Property taxes are going up, and schools contribute to the problem, but they're not the major problem. In the state of Maine, in the last 20 years, $5.5 billion has been acquired by communities, state, and federal governments don't pay taxes. 20 years ago, in 1996, 22 years ago, there was 35,000 acres of land on the tax rolls. There were in trust, land trusts. 1996, 35,000 acres. Since then, that has grown by 1,200%. We're up to 500,000 acres worth over $350 million. Most of it along the coast. Why is it that people on the coast and our fishermen are forced out of their homes because of property values and they're going inland? It's because land trusts have taken over. Right now, I'm in a battle. There's a law that says that Central Maine Power is required to give us the Kennebec Gorge to the state of Maine. They're going to just donate to the state of Maine. And they come in and say, why aren't you accepting it? I said, because it comes off the tax rolls. If you agree to continue paying the taxes on it, I'll take the land. But I don't want to hurt Somerset County. I don't want to take land off the tax rolls. So right now, we have $1.8 billion, $1.8 billion of land trust values has come off the tax rolls in the last 20-some odd years. Much of it is land itself, but a lot of it is real estate. I have no problem with land trusts. Look, it's your land, do what you want with it. I have no problem with that. But I firmly believe everybody's got to pay their fair share to keep our communities going. And this is nothing more than a way to stop paying taxes. Hospitals, in all due respect, I see this big crane coming in town, $500 million investment. The taxpayers have supported it, and while it's not a moral obligation, they're allowing the credit of the state to be used to finance that. We get no taxes. We get no fees in lieu of taxes. The largest users of law enforcement in the state of Maine is colleges and universities. Believe it or not. More activity in law enforcement than any other services in the state. When it comes to nursing homes and hospitals, it's the fire departments. Safety, of course you're going to take care of them. But there's no return. I'll give you an example. Colby College is worth more. The campus has got more value than the entire city of Waterville. Now, to their credit, the new president, President Green, has come off the hill and he's investing in the town. So at that, I'm absolutely amazed. I'm good for him. I can't say enough for what he's done. But up until then, prior to President Green, for a 5-year period, Colby gave the city $20,000 a year to help pay for rescue truck. That's it. That's not right. So what if it goes from $62,000 a year to $63,000? Those kids, hey, they've got an endowment that can pay for the $1,000. So can Bowdoin. So can Bates. Matter of fact, so can all the schools in Maine, including our university, should be contributing more. They only take, they don't give back. I think that there should be a fee in lieu of taxes, and I think there should be a fee on the residential side. That would help. That's really important going forward. And you know, you can dismiss it. I'm leaving in January. I'm going to be I'm going to be a normal citizen in January. Isn't that something great? My wife can't wait. But It's about Maine. It's about our future. I told Sarah the other day, we met and we were talking about tax conformity, and I said, Sarah, go back over the last 8 years and you tell me how many times I was wrong on fiscal issues. When it comes to fiscal issues, finance and economics, those issues, find how many times I was wrong. She couldn't name one. There are a couple. And I've made some mistakes. Believe me, I made some horrible mistakes. While a lot of people say I've appointed some good judges, I've had a Supreme Court judge lie to my face. I mean, that's a mistake, man. I dropped the ball on that. That should have never happened. We should have infiltrated, we should have made sure the due diligence should have made sure that he had that character flaw. So I take full responsibility. But on financial issues, the mistakes are few and far between, and they're not material to the betterment of the state. So tax conformity, they're in special session. They haven't done it yet. I don't know if you all understand what that means, but if they do not conform to the federal IRS code, which would be the first, we are going to have about 30 or 40 people immediately hired for January so that we can have a second tax code. So you have the federal tax code and you have the Maine tax code. We don't want that. I don't think Mainers want that. Businesses certainly don't want to have two sets of books. But that's where we're heading. Now, worst case is they don't conform. As of right now, they've refused to conform. If they do conform, which I suspect they're going to have to because they're really more interested in the election than they are in doing what's right, in many cases, and you know, I know people say, oh, that's an awful thing to say, but I live it every day. And it's both parties. I'll tell you, there's a gentleman in the legislature, and I'm very sorry to say he's leaving. He's not a Republican. He used to be a Democrat, but now he's an independent. He's running for Congress. I think he should be in Congress. He's that good a legislator. He's doing it for the right reason. His name is Marty Groman. I think that guy's the real deal. He is what Maine needs. He's a good man. He does it for the right reason. And there's a handful that do it that way. Some of them are turned out this year. I feel bad about that because they did a lot of good. There are some that jump from House to Senate, Senate to House. I mean, they're around forever. Some good comes out of it, but majority of it isn't good. If you leave your politics at the door and you grind in, you try to do what's best for the state. And I'll give you one. In tax conformity, I think you should all call your legislators and say, you got to have conformity. It's really important that we not have two tax systems. I want to hit on two other things. Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion, I've been saying since January, it is the law, but you got to fund it. You got to adequately fund it. You can't play games. Right now, they're going to send me a bill. They're going to let me hire 100 people, but no money to run Medicaid. It doesn't work that way. All they're going to do is do exactly what happened in 2010 when I came in. You're not going to be paying the hospitals. You simply aren't going to be paying the hospitals. Now, the other thing that's going to happen is Maine Equal Justice says, okay, on July 2nd, we're going to flood the airways. We're going to bring in 80,000 people to apply for Medicaid expansion. Fine. You're going to bring the HHS to a complete halt, and people that need renewals and single moms and all that, they're going to be in the pile. They're used to handling about 3,000 applications a month. Throw 20,000 at them, it's going to completely stop. Two options. Do nothing and they all get Medicaid with no money, or reject them. And then we start over. I'm a fiscal conservative. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm not even going to tell you. Just guess what I'm going to do. And then the last thing I want to talk to you before we open up for questions. Very, very important. Speaker comes to me last week and she says, tell you what, I'll let the debate go on minimum wage, but we'll get my people to put a gun to my Democrats so they vote against it. Okay, I'll take my chances there. But this is what she said. You sell the senior bonds that are on the books. And I said to her, got a deal with one caveat. You tell me how I prevent that $15 million to go to developers free. Because the way it's written now, and nobody seems to know this bond that Mark Eves, back when he was Speaker, he got passed, they're going to use Section 8 formula for rent control, but the money that the developers get is free money. So I will make somebody millionaires overnight by writing them a check. This passed on a Tuesday. On a Tuesday. That same week, that Friday, I had 3 legislators in my office, each asking me for $5 million of the $15 million. Because there's no debt service. It's general obligation bond, will be paid for by the taxpayers of Maine. You give them the money, and that's it. They walk away. I had one project. It's a $5.2 million project. I was asked to give him $5 million, and he would put in $200,000. Now, for those in this room think that's fair, here again, we have to agree to disagree. That's not right. 3 legislators came to me the same week trying to get $15 million gifts. It's just not right. That was earmarked for a certain company that the Speaker was employed by, and then it went away. He took a new job. That didn't last long. Just wrong. That's not what we are about. This is not right for the elderly. It's not right for the Maine people. We're asking the Maine people to pay the debt service on $15 million. The rents are going to be controlled, but the developer has no responsibility. Now, I am leaving in January. I'll sell them December 31st, and I'll get the first bid on it. Because why not, right? This is just wrong, folks. So I said to her, find a way, pass a quick law that says all general obligation bonds for housing have to have a debt service. And then we can figure it out. We can work something out. She doesn't want to do it. She says, we got to send it back to the voters. Okay, let's send it back to the voters. Let's send that one back to the voters and put a debt service in it. I will call Maine State Housing, and I'll sell $15 million housing bond tomorrow. I'll sell $30 million housing bond tomorrow. Because that's not the issue. It's not that we don't need housing bonds. It's not that we don't need housing, but we don't need to make people millionaires overnight at the expense of all taxpayers. That's the issue. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. If you have any, it's your last shot. Take a good one. Thank you. Come on, you got to have a couple of questions here. Somebody's got to have a question. No? You let me off the hook that easy, huh? Anyone? Yes.
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning.
First and foremost, thank you for your service. I've told my kids, I said, I've lived my entire life in Maine, and I have watched every governor since John Reed. You have moved the needle on more issues than any governor in your tenure. So whether we agree or not, you have done great public service.
That's correct. And it's not a matter of agreeing, it's a matter of having the debate. and then making a decision.
And that is my question. What brought you to public service, and what would you tell the people who are sitting on the sidelines to do in order to get what they need out of state government?
Okay, and that's a great question, because I think it's very, very important that everybody in public service understand why you get into it. I got into public service because I was going to retire in 2010. Not always, but I was the mayor of Waterville, and after I became the mayor of Waterville, several of the supporters said, you can do in Augusta what you've done in Waterville, but you got to go to Augusta. So I was talked into it. But basically, deep down, there are two basic reasons why I did it. One, I was homeless at 11, and I had the good fortune of having some people help me through high school, through college. I've had a modestly successful business career. I've raised 5 kids. They're all very successful. So I was very, very proud to say, okay, let's try it. It's my way of giving back. And when I remember the first person I spoke to was Bob Nutting, who was a former speaker. And I said, Bob, what do you think? He said, I'll tell you, I live in Oakland. You've done a marvelous job in Waterville. He says, but how the hell are you going to go from Waterville statewide and get people to get to know you? I said, I can take care of that one. As you know, I can get attention. Whether you like, Mickey Martin used to tell me, it doesn't make any difference if you're right or wrong, but they'll remember your name. And that's what's important. So that's the official reason. The unofficial reason is, in 2010, when my wife and I started speaking about retiring, she had a to-do list, and it was easier to get elected governor. Anyone else?
Yes.
Good morning.
Yes.
Pat Moody from AAA. Could you talk to us a little bit about the quality of our roads and bridges and what's going to happen with the potential transportation bond?
I don't know what's going to happen with transportation bond, but I will tell you this. I am watching this special session very, very, very closely. I am very concerned that they're going to empty the bank book in the next couple of days. If they do that, there will not be a bond sale this year. It's that simple. I just can't let it go into the tank. But this is what's happened since I've been the governor. David Bernhardt has been the Commissioner of Transportation. David Bernhardt has done more miles per year than any of his predecessors. Last year, he did over 1,000 miles. We no longer work through the legislature. We work through the Department of Transportation, through engineering and those people and consultants. And what we decide is they decide what roads are going to be done, what class of roads and how many bridges. Dave Bernhardt has got a knack of stretching a dollar. In 2010, we were ranked 44th in the nation, worst roads. We are now number 4 in the nation. We've made an improvement of 40 spots on the way we've treated our roads and our bridges because we've taken the politics out of it. Our roads, the state roads and the state aid roads, are in the best shape they've been in 50 years. The problem is local roads are a mess. A lot of local roads are a mess. In fact, Dave and I were meeting yesterday. He said there's a city in the state that he says we've put a ton of money in connectors and state aid roads, and we're trying to get them to help us on a couple of roads that are access to some of the state roads. They don't want to put any money in. If the local communities won't put money in city roads, there's nothing I can do about that. But I tell you, the 95 is the #1 road in the state of Maine. It's not the Turnpike. Turnpike fell a couple points behind. They're in second best roads in the state of Maine. We're going to do the 395 connector. We're going to be connecting Route 9 to the highway system. He is moving forward, and how they do it is very simply this. We work off a $2.2 billion budget. It's a 3-year, $2.2 billion budget. We try to do between $700 and $800 million a year. And he's been very successful at it. And he's got a really good staff. He's got one of his chief engineers It's a lady who does just a marvelous work. And we just opened up Sarah Mildred Long Bridge. Just in the last, since I've been governor, we've replaced a Memorial Bridge in Kittery and a Sarah Mildred Long Bridge. $250 million. So I'm very proud of the work he's done. Are they needing more work? Absolutely. Absolutely, we need more work. We are not the best in the country, and we should be. I've had people visiting from New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and they said, we wish our roads were in the shape that you have your state roads. So I'm pretty proud of what Dave's done. But we had a deficit when we came in. Our bridges in the state were in horrible shape. We've on the right track. We're on the right track, but we're a long ways from catching up. I think the roads are good. I think we got a lot to do on our bridges. And so I think we're on the right track. I will say this, whether the next governor is an independent, a Democrat, or a Republican, if they don't keep David Bernhardt, they are stupid. That simple. Yes,
We'll
ma'am.
take one more question.
My name is Nancy Page Akers of Portland, Maine. I'm a guest here today. I'd like to ask you a question about First Amendment freedom. I remember when you first became governor, and a lot of the liberals in the social work arena were calling you racist,
Oh, yeah.
all the names. And it was really discouraging to hear that. And then 8 years of Obama, and they never criticized his black racism, his black supremacy movement, and on the street, the people who are overtly racist from his camp. So I felt that was really unfair. But I think now our culture and society, we're changing to become more overly sensitive than ever. It's not getting better for First Amendment freedom. It's getting worse, in my opinion. And I'm a little scared about this because in quasi-government, social work, the psych, the academe, there are people like social workers who have way too much power over people's freedom of speech, like in the homeless shelters, and I know this for real. I'm not making this up. They have tremendous censorship abilities and access and authority. And it's turning our country into something different. And I just want to thank you.
Oh.
Thank you for your 8 years of service to our state of Maine. But I wanted to ask you, how can we make our state better with regard to First Amendment freedom? Thank you.
What I'm really concerned about, and you're absolutely right, I think we have gone away from the two-party system. We have maybe a four-party system now. The majority of our populace is unenrolled, so that's a group in itself. Then you have the Democratic Party, which has two major factions. It has the progressive arm, and it has the Democratic arm, or the moderate arm. Then the Republicans the same way. You have some that are way right on social issues, and then you have those that are the moderate. I call we're going through a period, I call it the politics of hatred. And you're absolutely right where it starts. It started in Washington. But not necessarily only in the White House. Congress. Congress is a big problem. Congress is a big problem because Congress fails to do its job. I will give a break to the Congress people, the congressional arm. I'm very concerned about the Senate arm of our government. We have a government right now that the majority leader in the Senate would rather keep the integrity of the Senate than do what's right for the American people. That's just wrong. It's not about him or the Senate. It's not the institution of the Senate. It's the American people. I spoke to Girl State last night. A young lady asked me, she says, why are you against pro-choice? I said, I'm not against pro-choice. I have no issue with you do what you want to do. I said, I believe that abortion has a place Rape, incest, I'm all in. I have no problem with that. Where I have a problem is when you use abortion as a form of contraception. That's where I have a problem. And I told her, I said, somebody has to speak for the unborn. So I've chosen to do that. My wife says, you spent your life talking about the underdog. I talk about elderly. I talk about children. I spent 15 years of my life working in homeless shelters. I spent 20 years of my life working for the clubhouse model in this state. I was involved in the first one that started back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and now we have 5. The city of Waterville, last year, the members of the clubhouse model, now for those of you who don't know, clubhouse is simply a place for people with intellectual disabilities to go and learn independent living skills and work skills. And my job was to find them work. So I would go out and convince employers to hire them. Of course, I was general manager of Martin's. It was really easy, so I just hire them. In fact, I got to tell you this. I got a national award for the work we did in homeless in the clubhouse model, and it was in Nancy Pelosi's caucus room. And I remember coming out. I was the mayor of Waterville at the time. I come up to the podium for a few words, and I said, I can just feel the love coming from these walls. Ted Kennedy was there. Barney Frank was there. We worked very closely on this whole issue. So people, my wife was telling me the other night, you've been 8 years in the governor and you're going to leave and nobody knows who you are. Very few people know who I am. And the reason for that is because the press and the media don't care. So that's the second problem with our country. The press and the media has moved to the left, and they're not willing to be balanced on the right. They are just one way. If I walked across the river, the Kennebec River, when I get back to Augusta, if I walked across the river, the headlines tomorrow morning would say, Governor can't swim. That's how bad it's gotten. So what I tell people is this, and I told Sean Moody that. He was up in Augusta yesterday, and I said, Sean, I will tell you this. Do not let go of your integrity. Do not let go of your character. Be honest. Honesty will get you through no matter what. You got to stay true to yourself. And the one thing you got to remember, if you come to this house to be loved, go get a dog. Because, man, it's brutal out there. And I was asked that question last night. How do you do it day in and day out? It's very, very easy. I have a wife. That's why it's been easy. And I will also say, this First Lady is the real deal. This lady has put up so much energy to work with veterans, to work with kids, never asking for anything from anybody. In fact, her best friend, while she was in the White House, was Barbara Bush. Those two were texting and talking, and they were great quiet buddies. And some of the stories that they would tell us are just amazing. But she just was so distraught when Barbara passed recently. But that's who we are. And the other thing about being a governor where you're controversial, and I'll close with this. The important thing is when they're criticizing you, I can be in Augusta working and getting things done. Because they never, ever come after you for the good things you do. It's only the bad stuff. So, and my staff knows it. I'll give them red meat and then go to work. And they spend 2 days discussing the red meat and doing what they got to do, and I'm working, getting things done. And it was so hard for them. There's no way the Democrats were interested in paying off the hospitals. And we did that with such finesse. So what they didn't realize, and what most people in the state don't realize, is we brought the liquor business back into the state. So now we have the liquor business, and we're getting all the profits. Then I used the liquor business as security to borrow $200 million to pay off Medicaid expansion. And the reason I did that is by using it as security, there's a little line in the bonds that says you cannot spend the excess until the bonds are all paid. So when the bonds are paid, there's going to be over $300 million go right to the general fund. $300 million is going to fold right into the rainy day fund. First time in the history. And right now it's at 250. So when I leave here, we're going to be close to $500 million in our rainy day fund, which is better than every AAA state. Better. We have better numbers than all the AAA states right now. In fact, we're challenging S&P and Moody's, saying you need to be honest with the numbers. So with that, I bid you adieu. And if you do have a kegs and issue, I'm more than happy to come down from Augusta. And whatever you do in November, make sure that the person that is elected governor doesn't give you the political talk, but gives you what they're going to do, and they do it. That's all that counts. They got to perform. Thank you.
I want to thank the governor for his remarks today and let you know that we'll be making a donation on his behalf to the Maine Cancer Foundation. I want to thank Jason Lundy at Bank of America and the Eggs and Issues staff for doing a great job this year, and we look forward to seeing you in September for our next round of Eggs and Issues. Thank you and enjoy your day.